Hi, I'm Jennifer Kloss, and I'm an art advisor based in Dallas, Texas. Today, I have the pleasure of bringing you a preview of the David Dike Fine Art Texas Art Auction. And today we are at 214 Projects, and I have David Dike with me. Hi, David.
Hello, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me today.
Yes, pleasure.
So we're going to look at a variety of auction lots today, variety of price points. We'll talk a little bit about estimates and some of the key artists in Texas art history. All right, we're going to first start with Julian Onderdonk.
Yes.
About your piece that's actually on the catalog.
Yeah, this is our feature piece. It's on the cover of the catalog. And it's a fabulous example of Julian Onderdonk's work. Of course, he grew up in San Antonio. He was born in 1882. His father, Robert Jenkins Onderdonk, was a very famous Texas painter. He did a lot of beautiful landscapes, but his specialty was portraiture. And Robert Onderdonk did portraits, and many of them are some of the governors from the 1870s, 1880s, and most of them are hanging down in the rotunda at the state capitol in Austin. Julian began studying with his father. Of course, he grew up around art. His father was a painter, and so he studied with him for a short period of time. And then after a while, Robert recognized that his son Julian had a tremendous talent, so he encouraged him to go to New York and study with William Merritt Chase, whom he studied with. So Julian, in 1900, Julian moved to New York and began to study with William Merritt Chase at the Shinnecock School in upstate New York. And so he stayed there for 9 years and came back to Texas in the fall of 1909. And this particular painting was done in 1910, and it captures the Spanish oaks, but it captures the beauty and the color and the lighting of the Texas Hill Country. And that's what, of course, William Merritt Chase was a master with light and color, and he taught that to most of his students. And Onderdonk came back and was able to capture the beauty of the light. And this is an exciting example. We're thrilled to have it. It's $175,000 to $200,000 painting, but we had one in the auction last year that sold for $374,000, a little larger than this, but it was a Julian Onderdonk. Of course, his works are pretty rare because he died in 1922 at the age of 40, so there are not a lot of them out there, and many of them are in museums such as the Amon Carter and the Dallas Museum, so they're hard to come by.
They're great to have for any collection, and certainly it sounds like the market is always strong for Julian Onderdonk.
It is, it has been, since I've been in business 35 years.
Well, so we're going to look at another piece that highlights the Hill Country, a landscape in the Hill Country. One of my favorite artists, Porfirio Salinas, that I've gotten to know more about through you the past couple years. So let's talk a little bit about this piece and sort of similarities and differences.
Well, Porfirio Salinas was born in 1910 in Bastrop, Texas, just east of Austin. And of course, he grew up in an environment, his family, they're not collectors of art, they didn't have art, and nobody was an artist, but he, I believe, went to an exhibition and saw some of Julian Onderdonk's work and became very inspired. And he moved to San Antonio, and of course, that's where Onderdonk was from. But Salinas discovered his own technique and his own style, and he loved the Hill Country, and he was able to capture the light and the colors of the Hill Country. And he painted this particular painting in the 1950s. It's one of his most famous paintings. In fact, there were prints made of this painting when it first was finished in the 1950s. A guy named James Betts from Fort Worth purchased this painting from Dewey Bradford, who owned the Country Store Gallery in Austin. And Mr. Bradford was the art gallery owner that discovered Salinas. And he recognized his talent and took him on as one of his stable of artists, and of course sold paintings to a lot of wealthy families in Texas. And of course Mr. Bradford was friends with a lot of the politicians in Austin back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And Salinas' work was caught the attention of Allen Shivers, who was the governor of Texas in the 50s, and he began to collect his work. And then John Connolly, and then he got into the White House. LBJ loved Salinas' paintings, and he hung 7 of them in the White House. And of course at that time, in the 60s, Salinas' popularity just soared, and everybody wanted to buy a Salinas. But we're excited about this one because it's been in the same family for 75 years, and it's just a great example, and we're fortunate to have it. It's on the back cover of our catalog this year.
Well, this is a great example of having a great story behind it and the history of the work, which we say is the provenance of a work. So oftentimes if you do get to talk about some of these particular lots, there's great stories to tell. So that's what is so exciting. All right, we're going to turn the corner around here and look at a smaller work by Alexander Hogue. And I was really taken by also the scale, but also that it was made in 1927, an early work.
Correct, yes. In the summer months, a lot of these artists, of course, we didn't have air conditioning in Texas in the 20s, and so a lot of artists would either go to Colorado Springs or Taos or Santa Fe to paint because it was nice and cool, and there was a lot of artists living in those colonies. And of course, Hogue was good friends with Ernest Blumenschein and Herbert Buck-Dunton and some of the early Taos founders. And so he loved to go up and paint. And this particular painting was done in 1927 in Taos. And I love the painting because it's an absolute jewel. It's got a wonderful original frame. You can almost feel the wind blowing across the trees. And the other part of it that I love is the fact that he wrote the title and the date on the back of the painting, along with his address here in Dallas. And I love when artists document the location and the date. And this one says October 1927. And but it's an absolute great example of his work. And of course, he was one of the leading artists from the Dallas Nine. And he and Jerry Bywaters and Dozier were all part of that group. And this is coming out of a private collection here in Dallas.
Well, I do agree. I think that's a jewel of the auction. Okay, we're now going to look at some works by Scott and Stuart Gentling here, and entitled Birds of Texas, from a folio that I actually particularly caught my eye when I came here first to look at the auction lots. These are at a nice price point, starting at an estimate of $1,000. So they have works here in the auction that are $1,000 and or under $1,000. So I want to encourage emerging collectors to take a look at some of the works on paper that are a great way to start collecting. So David, tell us a little bit about this folio.
Well, the Gentling brothers were legendary artists from Fort Worth, and they were extremely talented. They were very much influenced by Andrew Wyeth and Jamie Wyeth, but they also were noted for their portraits. They did a portrait of George Bush that now hangs at the state capitol. They did a portrait of Amon Carter that's at the Amon Carter Museum. But they did this book of birds, of all the Texas birds, and they documented it, and they did a portfolio of 500 large books, and these were part of that portfolio. And the exciting thing about this particular portfolio is a client of mine, Shannon Wynn, purchased this book for a new restaurant he was going to open in Fort Worth called the Bird Cafe. And it was in Sundance Square, and he framed them all up and hung them in the Bird Cafe. Unfortunately, the Bird Cafe closed, and these particular works are coming out of the Bird Cafe in Fort Worth. But they're great examples of the Gentlings' work. Of course, we've lost both of them. The Amon Carter is going to do a big retrospective for the Gentlings next year at the museum in the spring. But they deserve the tribute. They're such legendary artists and important artists, and I'm excited to have these in the auction this year.
I think it's a great opportunity. So we've got several. So take a look.
Yes,
these are all on the website as well. We're next going to look at really sort of the introduction of modernism in art history and the way we look at American art. Everett Spruce here. I love this work called River Bird, an estimate of about $20,000.
Correct. Well, this painting, I sold this painting 25 years ago to a retired judge, or to a judge in Fort Worth who's recently retired, and he's decided to sell it. He and his wife are moving to a smaller home, and that's sometimes how we are able to obtain paintings. People are moving, or or they inherit something they want to sell. But this painting is fabulous. It was done in the mid-1940s, and he too was part of the Dallas Nine. He lived in Arkansas, but he was studying with Olin Travis at his studio his school in Cass, Arkansas. And Mr. Travis recognized that Spruce had a tremendous talent. He encouraged him to move to Dallas, which he did. And then later on, he got an offer from the University of Texas to head up the art department down there. So he moved to Austin and began to teach down there in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I believe he retired in 81, 82. But I'm excited about this particular painting, and the timing is perfect because the Amon Carter Museum is doing a retrospective for Spruce that is currently up until the end of November, and I would encourage you to go see it because it's an exciting exhibition. It shows Spruce's works from the 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way up through the 70s. And there's also a book that they published. I've not gotten the book yet, but I hope to, but it's a great documentation of all of his work.
And I think that's a great thing to mention about how a lot of these artists are in collections, museum collections, and that the Amon Carter happens to have the exhibition up now. So great tie-in. Okay, well, next we'll actually look at a couple female artists, and they truly sparked my interest as I saw the auction lots revealed. So we're going to take a look at Jennie Haddad, Dorothy Hood, and then another work by Jennie Haddad. So tell us a little bit about these women who have sort of now actually having a new moment in the collecting market.
They truly are. I mean, a lot of these women, unfortunately, in the 30s and 40s, they didn't get the notoriety they deserved, and the men kind of dominated the show, the exhibitions and museums. Most of all the museums, the men were the directors and the curators, and so the women were kind of put on the back burner. But these artists were real mavericks for their time, Dorothy Hood and Jennie Haddad, and I'm excited to have examples of both of their works. Jennie Haddad was actually from Lebanon. Her father moved to this country in 1912 when she was 6 years old and opened a store in Sudan, Texas, up in the Panhandle. After she got out of college, she attended SMU, and then after getting out of SMU, she studied with Otis Dozier. She and her husband, she got married after she graduated, and they moved to Tyler. And she really kind of put art on the back burner. Unfortunately, her husband died at the age of 54 in 1950. And so they did not have children. So Jennie said, I'm gonna pursue my love of painting, and I'm gonna go study in Provincetown with Hans Hofmann. So she moves to Provincetown and begins studying with Hans Hofmann. But at that time, Helen Frankenthaler was there, Elaine de Kooning, so much energy in the art world. I mean, all these great master post-impression, abstract expressionist artists were living up there at the time. And so she got to interact with them and know them and become inspired by them. So she lived there from about 55 to 59. And these two pictures that we have by Jennie Haddad were done during that time frame. And to me, they're considered the best examples because she was experiencing all the energy from being inspired by those artists. And you can see this one is called The Storm. And you can see it's like a storm of color. It's got great composition, great energy, great color, these happy yellows and blues, and that's kind of what people like to see these days. But it's a terrific example of her work, and we're excited to have it in the auction. The other artist is Dorothy Hood. Of course, she was born in Bryan, Texas, home of Texas A&M, College Station down in that area. And then later on, she began to study. She went to Houston, University of Houston to study, and then she went to the Rhode Island School of Design to study up there. And then in 1941, she decided to move to Mexico. And of course, there were several great artists, as you know, Diego Rivera, Jose Arpa. There were several great painters that lived down there. And she ended up moving to Mexico and got to meet all of these artists and was inspired by these artists. Now, this particular painting, in 1960, she moved back to Houston, and she was fascinated with space exploration. And of course, the 60s were the time of space exploration. And in 1968, Stanley Kubrick's movie 2001 Space Odyssey came out, and she went to go see that in April of 1968 and was so inspired by space exploration that she started doing these whole series of space paintings. And this one is called Earth and Full Moon, and it was done in 1970, and it's got that great color. You know, you got this kind of scenes around space, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but it's got great color.
Exactly, the layering and the colors, and I love that connection to the space age.
Yeah, well, you can almost see that in this painting. And she was fascinated with the stars and just all the different planets, and she started implementing these paintings in the late 60s all the way through the 70s. But she's in the Houston Fine Arts Museum. She's in a lot of major collections. In fact, there was a big retrospective for her works about 5 or 6 years ago. And Susie Khalil did a beautiful book on that exhibition and highlighted a lot of her paintings in that show.
Well, this is wonderful. I think it's a nice connection to telling these stories about these female artists that maybe were working in and amongst all of the greats of the abstract expressionist era, but that now we in the 21st century can look at even through a different lens in terms of collecting. And so what is the estimate on this one?
This one is estimated at $25,000 to $35,000.
Okay, great.
And then the Jennie Haddad's, this one's called 1 O'Clock. And this was estimated at $15,000 to $25,000. But it's, again, another one that has great color. This was done in 1958. And one of the things that Hans Hofmann was known for was slab paintings. And this is kind of the slab application of paint onto the canvas.
Well, this is great. Well, David, thank you so much for taking us through some of the highlights of the auction. And I hope everyone joins us for the live auction on October 3rd. And I will link all the information for you on the website to study and/or register. So thank you so much, David.
Jennifer, thank you.